In this episode, we consider whether the American political system, or even the post-World War II order in the world, is subject to forces like entropy in a physics sense, and whether we're seeing the signs of that now. Hello, welcome to the Call Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys, and joining me today is a man whose smooth vocals have been known to turn a podcast into a motion park. Tunde Ogunlana. Tunde, are you ready to show us why you're the boss man in this game?
Yeah, man, that's a lot of, you put a lot on me on that one.
Hey, so, man, you thrive under pressure, man. I'm trying to turn the pressure up on you every time.
I'm getting nervous, man. You know, I'm about to fold like a cheap suit over here. You got all this pressure you put on me. Jesus.
Now, before we get started, if you enjoy the show, I ask that you subscribe, like the show on YouTube or your podcast app. Doing so really helps the show out. We're recording on August 4th, 2026. And Tunde, you recently sent me a piece entitled The Entropy of Power, in which the author, Mike Harper, makes a pretty interesting case that human systems, including the kinds of systems that we organize our societies with, are subject to the same force of entropy that systems are in the physical world. You know, systems in physics, entropy is understood to affect physical systems, whether it be a life form or a storm cloud, to cause them to naturally progress from order to disorder. So in the piece you sent me, though, the case is made that applies this to political systems as well. And then saying that our political systems will naturally drift from order to disorder unless new energy is consistently applied to maintain it. It also asserts that we're seeing this happen right now in the US today. So Tunde, to get us started, I know you've on many occasions in our shows have suggested that entropy affects our political systems. So do you think like this direct case that was made here is something that was compelling to you, or does that make you reconsider? Or what was your reaction overall in this, the idea of political systems, entropy, in this direct way that the author makes it?
I will say, yes, it intrigued me. And I do think that, entropy conceptually is something very important in, the world of matter, right? The physical world, the universe, things like that. And there's even been speculation and studies that entropy is how we as humans actually experience time. And so the idea that entropy, if it's that important as a concept with matter and physics in the universe, and we're made up of matter in the physical universe, that entropy would manifest itself on human consciousness as well. And the ideas of things like you said, order, slowly at some point forms into some sort of disorder, and then a new order is formed again. And I do think that the author's onto something, that we are experiencing a cultural and political entropy. Just globally, I think it's the post-World War II order, if I could say it that way, in maybe a shorter time span, and maybe in a longer time span of maybe a few hundred years, the continuing decline of the European empires dominating the world, with the rise of China and India and other parts of the world that used to be colonies of the Western powers and empires. I think that is all part of reality right now. And so yeah. And I think in the discussion in the article, he breaks down two forms: bureaucratic and incentive entropy, which I found very interesting.
Yeah. Put some meat on those. Like I said, because you've
exactly
made this connection several times. Like when you sent me this, I'm like, all right, so he's just sending me something that he thinks already. But the author did put some more meat on the bones, like clearly put in. We'll have the show notes. To me, it was really interesting. And I think that the leap, I've never challenged you on it. I always thought it was a good point when you've made it. And I thought, I think the idea, though, is an astute observation, because what we're really talking about are the interactions between multiple different components. That's the system, so to speak. And each of these components has what they're trying to do, but then they operate together to create a bigger system. The sun is made up of individual components, that are operating together. All these atoms, molecules, that are operating, and then together they form a sun that's shooting off photons and all this other stuff at all times, and turning hydrogen to helium, and so that applying that to our human systems, where again the same kind of analogy can be drawn, where it's like, okay, yeah, we have individual components working in concert to create some bigger thing. It would make sense that would result in the concept of entropy applying as well, because and the arc being that the disorder creates the urge for order, so people arise out of the disorder to create an order. The people that create that order then are hyper aware of all the risks, and they're paying attention. They're constantly putting energy in to keep the order in place. But the longer you get away from people who had to put it together or who had to reform it, the interesting about the United States is that you can argue that we've been through this several times as a nation, and the nation itself survived, but it changed forms several times in terms of what the nation was. But each time, the further you get away from the change in form, the disorder to order, people appreciate what's the effort and energy that's needed to maintain it less and less and less. And so it will fall into disorder, which will take you down the cycle altogether. So it makes a lot of sense, and as you said, I want to ask you, what stood out to you in that sense, because the meat on the bones, I thought were compelling cases. So did you want to touch on either one of those, the incentive or?
Yeah, well, as you're talking, I'll say this, because we did this show just recently in the last few weeks about post-literacy. And in that discussion, we discussed, there was a quote from Benjamin Franklin where he was praising the new Constitution at the time, in the 1780s and all that. And he was saying how this was great because you have such a literate population that they can read, and they're all this and that. And it made me think, as you're talking, I'm like, yeah, Ben Franklin, he couldn't foresee that the invention of the screen over time would be part of the seeds of the entropy, the disorder from the literate part of American history.
See, man, he shouldn't have been messing around with lightning then, man. No, I'm sorry,
hey, man. Don't get on my board. But no. So no, but there was some interesting stuff. So like there's a quote from the article here: rules written to restrain power become tools for exercising it. Procedures designed to ensure fairness harden into rituals that protect insiders. And I was like, wow, that's such an interesting telling. Like you're saying, that the founding of the United States, the idea of the Electoral College and representation of congressional districts was a genuine way to say, hey, everybody needs to have some sort of equal representation, and we got to be fair. These states without a lot of population, and we'll give them a little bit more juice on this stuff, the Electoral College, things like that. And then I was thinking about how the thing starting last year about the gerrymandering and how going outside of the constitutional norm of waiting for the census to be done at the beginning or end of each decade, and the need for people, it says, procedures designed to ensure fairness harden into rituals that protect insiders. Yeah. That's what I thought about this gerrymandering stuff. I was like, man, my until this recent redistricting that we'll see what happens this year, my congressperson had been my congressperson for like 30 years.
Yeah.
And her district has been rejected. If you look at it, it does look like a freaking salamander. It doesn't look natural in the geographical space that I live in. And so yeah, it's interesting that there's this beautiful system, this constitutional republic, and this order of three co-equal branches of government now has been hijacked. And think about it, we have right now a prominent politician who people don't know if he's been dead or alive. The senator from Kentucky.
Well, right? Think about what you're saying, though.
Just
to like what you're saying as far as the idea of a political district is supposed to provide representation to a smaller group of people, not just the whole state, which your senator does the whole state, but the House is supposed to be more personal than that. So they have the arrangement, the setup is to have a district that obviously it's not this anymore, but it was a neighborhood or it was a community. It was something like that. But now that has been hijacked. That concept has been hijacked to create this crazy looking thing just to serve an insider, just to serve so it's literally what you're talking about, and how the machinery of the system that was designed to help has been turned into a tool to concentrate power.
Yeah. And that's why, man, it's It's a tough thing for me sometimes to talk to people about because they think I'm too doom and gloom. But I'm like, that's why I don't think we're going back to a 2015 America or pre that. We're just going to go in. This entropy is going to lead us into a new order that's something different. And we're seeing the seeds of the new order being formed as we're going through the disorder of the last, phase, which, for example, I was having this conversation with my wife. She thinks I'm crazy. I said, in 2024, the Supreme Court gave the executive branch immunity from the law.
Yeah.
And I said, and there'll be cases going to the Supreme Court and all that that'll work it out over the next decade or two. But in the end of the day, that's different. I said, the country's now different than from the 1780s when it was founded, because we had 3 co-equal branches.
Yeah.
Now one of the branches is elevated, which means is going to change the incentives of people that are in there.
Yeah.
And that's naturally just going to change the way that our system works in certain ways. And so, and James, we've had this conversation just privately separately. I mean, the ability for the executive branch to be above others means that they're doing things like buying government buying interests into publicly traded companies.
Yeah. Which is another
they don't have to
departure.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, that's a small example of that's a butterfly effect step that now the U.S. government owns publicly traded companies. That never happened before. So that's going to morph into something else. And that's one example in one direction. And there's 100 different directions.
The irony of that,
I'm on a rant.
Well, the irony of that to me is that same government is out here taking stakes in the means of production and the companies, while also telling everybody to watch out for the socialists.
Yeah.
The socialists are coming. It's like, well, hold up. I think what you're doing is exactly what you're telling everybody to watch out for. They're like, no. We're telling you to watch out for the socialists that want to give you healthcare. Watch out for those guys, not the socialists who want to take over, private companies. but no, like I think the way you described that was very interesting to me. And I think this is how, like, there are 2 types of creep. One the author talks about, which I think is very important to remember, that it's not always necessarily the bad actor, so to speak. It's people acting in line with the incentives that they have at that moment, So, and he gives examples of that. The other is the bad actor, so to speak, and the idea that it's almost like a virus. And this goes into your redistricting thing. Like, the actors who want to concentrate power, who want to concentrate wealth, all those types of things, how they use the system's machinery in order to do it. That's how a virus comes into your body, and then it uses your own cells to create copies of itself, which then go and infect other cells. And so that's the process of that. And to me, the piece on without constant energy to maintain the system was very important, along with the idea of remembering what those things are for. And so if you do get too caught up in the procedure of everything and how everything has to be, you lose the idea of why it's there in the first place. Like, we get so caught up a lot of times when people are talking about the Electoral College and this and that, we get so caught up, and it's like, well, what is the point of us voting? Can we start there and then figure out, okay, what's the point of us voting? Is the point of us voting to have these little tricks and all these things here, or even the districts, the congressional districts? Is the point to have all these little tricks and so that we can, cordon off power for ourselves, or certain people can cordon off power for themselves and never be challenged and so forth? And it's like, everything that our whole discussions on these things never get to the idea of, well, what are we doing this stuff for? Is the point still to have representative government? Is the point to settle scores? Is the point to stick it to somebody else who's your countryman, actually? Because if you kind of stick it to your countryman, you're kind of sticking it to yourself, because you guys are in the same boat ultimately. So I think losing touch with why you're doing these things is really in a human system standpoint. Obviously, that's not your body. Your body being subject to entropy. It's not like your heart cell forgets what it's there for. It just eventually, that's a more physical process. But with these human systems, it is like that the actors become further and further removed from what they're supposed to be doing. And then they can't, even if they're mustering energy to try to save it, they don't even know where that energy should be placed. Where should the energy go? If certain people have decided they are unwilling to lose elections, and if they win, then it's cool. And if they don't win, then they're going to create a big stink about it and try to get it overturned. If the system has mechanisms in place to slow that down or to stop that to some degree, but it also takes a lot of will and energy from the people in the system to execute their roles and then make people pay from a legal standpoint. And if that doesn't happen, that's not a failure of the system, that's a failure of the people.
Yeah. Well, this article spoke to this was part of the political entropy piece. And as I want to follow on what you said, it's very good. I'll quote from the article. It says, "No one benefits from slowing the process. The system rewards one thing, compliance with procedure."
Yeah.
And then the next quote, "Procedure has replaced purpose." And that's really to your point. And I think it's a great point you make, James, because if we think about how we're talking about a country that was founded with the idea of a representative government that basically was formed itself after leaving a king.
Yeah.
So that was the original entropy, right? Like the thing was the colonies where the King George was the one ruling over it and taxing everybody and had governors here. That was basically feudalism, right? And the American colonists said, no, we want a different system, right? We want a system where everyone can be represented and da-da-da.
I mean, and to be fair, that system was subject to entropy and failed around the 1850s and 60s, and then there was disorder and then it reformed again. And then you had, so you can look at this as going to disorder doesn't necessarily mean the end of everything. It means a new organizing structure is going to have to arise because the existing one is no longer capable of meeting the needs of whatever the system is supposed to be.
I thank you for that, because that's kind of what I was trying to explain to my wife. Like, seriously, she's like, "Man, you're too negative." And I was like, well, actually, I'm not saying everything has to be terrible in the future. I'm just saying that I'm very sober in the idea that the post-World War II order that saw the United States as the only one standing after this huge war and the 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, and the Marshall Plan, where we're exporting, goods and services around the world, and the whole world's our customer. And the only big player against us was this USSR thing, which couldn't figure it out. And by 1991, we're the ones that are dominating. Oh, and I go, yeah, I realize that's over. That is over. We're back to a pre-World War II world, or pre-World War I, really, where United States, the British Empire peaked in 1914. And the United States was, 150 years old at that point. So it's the idea that the United States has never been in a world where it didn't have other dominant empires and players that it was competing with is not true. We just haven't been alive for that. And now we're going to be alive to see it play out. And so I think that's why I wanted to stop on that, James, because when we talk like this, I think a lot of people think that we're saying that everything's going to go like to the Stone Ages or something. And it's not that. It's just that we have to recognize that the era that we grew up in a sense, and that type of that normalcy is over.
Yeah.
And if we want to have some sort of remnants of what we feel this country was founded about, like the 3 co-equal branches and not having an authoritarian type of system, then I think this idea of procedure has replaced purpose. That's what we got to start reminding ourselves of. What's the purpose of this thing? Like you said about districts and representing, that's the purpose of it. Representing people.
Yes.
And
that to me is the key piece. What it is when you see the signs of entropy, the key piece is that's a wake-up call for the people of good faith, because a new system is going to be formed. And if you sit back and just hope that the old thing is going to magically reappear, you won't have a role in forming the new system. You won't be able to take a look and say, okay, well, why is blank here? We don't necessarily have to go back to that. We don't necessarily even have to, for just the congressional district thing, for example. We don't necessarily have to go back to what it was before. Gerrymandering has been a problem a long time. We could go back. We could go to a new thing where the state has a certain number of representatives and it's voted by proportional representation. Or you use instant runoff voting. Like, there are a lot of different things that we can move to that may be better. So it's not that it's the wake-up call that has to be recognize. The people who want to tear things apart already see it. They're already jumping on all the machinery and saying, hey, let's turn this to use it for a selfish reason, for our personal benefit. The people of good faith have to recognize what's happening and not say, okay, well, we'll kick back and wait until these actors, age out or whatever, go away, and then things will revert back to where they were before. That's not the way it works. You have to then apply energy from people of good faith have to apply energy to try to now guide the system into the next, whatever the next phase is going to be, not leave it totally to the bad actors and just counting on them to go away. That was another key piece that stood out in this piece to me, was how he talked about how people tend to focus on the bad actors and not how the system either needs to be addressed or what's happening in the system that allowed these bad actors to come up in the first place. And it's not always that it's the bad actors, yes, are the shiny object and we have to work to counteract them. But in many respects, it's how the system has fallen off that we need to address. When you get a virus, most viruses, you don't take an antiviral. You strengthen your own immune system, and then you have to work. Your body then puts everything back together. So last thoughts before we close it up.
Yeah. Just to follow on that, I mean, there's a part of the article at the end that I highlighted that I want to go over because it speaks to what you said. I'll quote: "Entropy doesn't produce chaos alone; it produces centralization."
Yeah,
and that's key because, as what you were saying, I want to read this: "A decaying republic doesn't simply fall apart. It reorganizes around whatever is best positioned to exploit the disorder." That speaks exactly to what you said.
Yeah.
The vacuum left by hollowed out institutions doesn't stay empty. It fills. And I think that's the message I want to leave to everybody who says they don't like what they're seeing in America today and this whole turn of authoritarianism and all that. And that's what I was trying to tell my wife.
Or anyone who cares about the idea of the U.S. Constitution or the principles of three co-equal branches of government or the idea of rule of law, all these things that we are watching decay. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And no, but that's the point, is that someone is going to fill the void. And if it's not you or someone who you want to support that thinks like you about representative government and the importance of that and maintaining
or a new system,
three co-equal branches, or getting corporate money out of campaign spending so that people can have a chance to compete financially with, oligarchs, right? Like all these things that people seem to be waking up to, then, if you don't get out and support politicians, if you don't run for office yourself, if you don't and start locally, city council, all that stuff, then someone else is going to do it. And that's how we got here.
Yeah.
That's why, James, I keep thinking about and bringing up that group Moms for Liberty, because for me, it was an example of a group that was funded by shadow money and that did go to school boards and that did get books banned from states like ours and did get the educational system changed in a lot of places. And it's because they just showed up and made an effort. And a lot of people who didn't like that didn't show up.
Yeah.
And we can multiply that by dozens of examples in our culture. And here we are 10 years later. So yeah, that's it. It's going to happen. It's entropy.
So we people who would like to, again, people of good faith will have to, it's time to stand up, basically. It's time to get up, start paying attention, and it's time to participate in this, the system, the disorder that is coming will then form into a new order. And if you're just waiting for things to revert to something else, then you will have no say in whatever that new order is. And like you said, it's going to, there are people who will offer solutions, and those solutions you'll probably not be comfortable with, but they're going to offer solutions. And in that moment of disorder, whoever's offering solution is ahead of everybody else, because a lot of other people haven't gotten off. They're waiting for some reversion. So, but I think we can wrap from there. We appreciate you for joining us on this part. We'll have a second part of this episode, so please join us for that as well. Till then, I'm James Keys.
I'm Tunde Ogunlana.
All right, we'll talk soon.